We've got Daniel Hannan on the line. He's Conservative MEP, of course, also author of What Next? How to Get the Best from Brexit. Daniel, I love the piece in The Sun today about Switzerland. In fact, I want us to become more like Switzerland, but I'm getting hardly any support from anybody.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to like? You know, they've got a great relationship with the EU. They've got low taxes. They've got strong growth. They've got a really good system of local democracy. I think we could learn a lot from the way the Swiss arrange things.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, funnily enough, we were talking to Peter Foster from The Telegraph a little bit earlier on, and he was saying that you were being slightly disingenuous in your piece by not mentioning the fact that Switzerland is, in fact, a part of the Schengen Agreement.
Well, which is why it's an exact parallel, because Ireland and the UK have the common travel area. So it is, if you like, a mini Schengen that covers the British Isles. So it is an exact parallel with Switzerland's relations with the rest of the EU. Now, you know, the point here is that the people pushing the customs union have a motive of trying to make it a bad deal, but it is a lie to make out that it's all about Ireland. And the simple proof of that is contrast Turkey, which is in the customs union, which has a heavily militarized, heavily policed, closed border in parts with the EU. The customs union hasn't done away with that. With Switzerland, which is much, much more open, much easier to cross. You know, most of its crossing points are completely unmanned, and yet Switzerland wouldn't dream of joining the customs union, because joining the customs union would mean that the Swiss wouldn't be able to do their own free trade agreements with the Chinese and so on.
But Dan, when you come, yes, of course, Switzerland is not within the customs union, but it has 100 bilaterals, which many experts say pretty much mirrors what the customs union, they sort of copied and pasted from the customs union. So in some ways, it is, some people say, all but in name. In the customs union.
That's not right. It certainly does replicate parts of the single market. That's true, and I think that's quite a good model for us. I think there are economies of scale to be had from copying EU standards on some things, although with the ability to diverge when it's not in our interest to copy. And that is what the Swiss have pioneered. I think that's a very good model for a country like ours. Remember that the Swiss, in per capita terms, sell 5 times as much to the EU from the outside as we do from the inside. So plenty of that. But in terms of the customs union, which is a different thing, the Swiss have an active trade policy. They just signed a trade deal with the Philippines last year. You know, they wouldn't dream of making all of their trade contingent on what Brussels decides. They're a nation of 8 million. The idea that we, a nation of 65 million, would do so is just ridiculous. And the people who are pushing this idea are being disingenuous and cynical.
But Peter was saying earlier that Brussels absolutely hates the Swiss model, and particularly in your point, he was echoing your point, saying it hates the Swiss model for a country of 8 million. There's no way it's going to agree to the Swiss model, which it already hates for a small country, for a big country.
Well, okay, so we're moving, just before we get to that, so I just want to re-emphasize this thing that, the customs union will not solve the Irish border. The way of solving the Irish border is a deep, comprehensive deal based on the bilateral recognition of each other's standards. If we had mutual recognition, that's the way of solving it. But in terms of, will the EU do a deal? Look, they're not going to totally copy, of course, what the Swiss do. But the broad model of being in a free market but outside the political institutions, that's something that I think the EU, even before the referendum, were holding up as a model for places like Britain to follow, because they were sick of us always vetoing everything and blocking federalism.
But it feels that, I don't know if this is you, but it feels that a lot of Brexiteers have changed their tune on this, because I used to hear all this thing, we don't want to fall into the Swiss trap, it was always called. There's the Swiss model that had the guillotine clause and all these things, we didn't want to be Swiss, and now suddenly we do want to be Swiss. What's changed?
Well, I've always thought that something along the lines of what the Swiss do is probably our best model, and I argued that before. But of course, it's not going to be a total copy.
So,
sorry.
Sorry, you dipped out for a second there. So you were saying that you always thought some form, but not a direct.
I hope I've been consistent in saying that Switzerland is the closest. But of course, it's not going to be identical. I mean, we're a big maritime global trader in a way that Switzerland isn't. They're much more dependent on trade with the EU. But the broad outlines, I think, are something that we should work on. And certainly, if you're looking at avoiding an obtrusive border in Ireland, start with the EU's least obtrusive external borders, which are Norway and Switzerland, rather than with one of its more militarized borders, which is the customs union's border with Turkey.
Because I know you've said in your article that you travel through that border numerous times. And it's very easy, but of course you're not travelling through with a massive articulated lorry full of goods. And other organisations and HGV operators have said that actually it's much harder than you're making out, and that there are endless forms, there are agents to be paid, there are 150 euros. There you have to go through 2 or 3 different sort of staging posts along the border, pull your truck up, fill out loads of forms, so that it's not that easy.
Well, most customs declarations these days are done online and in advance. Switzerland is on major haulage routes. I mean, you go through Switzerland if you're going from Germany to Italy or from France to Austria, and that border is crossed by more than 2 million people every day. So plainly, it's not preventing things from happening. But yeah, I think we could do better, because starting from modern technology, modern number plate recognition and tracking systems, and maybe even blockchain systems for customs clearance, we could do a lot better than if we were starting from the border posts that are inherited from an age when none of that existed.
Sure, and you talk as well, Daniel, about the sort of hypocrisy, if you like, of the Labour position and how they've flip-flopped around on this a lot, but they're now sort of in favour of keeping tariffs, which would harm what you would think would be their sort of, intellectually chosen people, if you like, those in poor countries making stuff.
This is the oddest thing. This is the strangest thing, Mike. I mean, as recently as January, Jeremy Corbyn was saying, I'm against the customs union because it is protectionist against developing nations. Those were his exact words, protectionist against developing nations. It's spot on, right? It does an awful lot of preventable damage in Africa and in other poor countries. And in doing so, it also pushes up prices, which disproportionately hits the poorest people in Britain, because the highest tariffs are on food, clothing and footwear. And the people who have to spend the highest proportion of their budgets on those basic things are low-income families. I mean, we're all hit by those tariffs. Everybody is hurt by them, but the damage is disproportionately heavy for people for whom that represents the highest share of your bills. So it is bizarre to see a left-of-centre party that never really liked the customs union. I mean, even traditionally, even the Europhile Labour people said this is one aspect that we disapprove of. Now saying this is the one bit that we want to keep. Now, I just don't believe that that's for real. What they've done is they've spotted an opportunity to try and inflict a defeat on the government, and it is absolutely cynical, and they're treating us like fools, because we can all see this.
Well, that's true. However, the problem is the government's allowing people to be treated like fools inside the government, because they can't seem to agree on a sort of cogent and proper policy about Northern Ireland, because Theresa May keeps changing her mind on it.
I mean, I think what's going on is that a lot of people are
I'll take that as a tacit agreement with that statement.
Well, I'll tell you how I see it. I think the support for the customs union isn't really from people who have thought it through. It's very often from people who couldn't have told you what the customs union was a year ago.
Right.
But they are looking for a win on something, something that the Eurosceptics want. Let's take it away from them. I think because I think you can make a good case for saying we should have a moderate approach to Brexit because it was a very close result. I agree with that, and I've since polling day been proposing all sorts of ways in which we could find compromises that most of the 52% and most of the 48% could live with. But the customs union is not in that category. It's not like saying, let's have a medium burger because half the country wanted a well-done burger and half wanted a rare burger, so let's go for something in the middle. It's more like chucking the burger in the bin and eating the napkin, because staying in the customs union while leaving the EU is absolutely the worst of all worlds. It means that Brussels controls 100% of our trade policy, and we have 0% input into what that trade policy should be.
And Daniel, am I right in thinking this is the what's going to be discussed at this Brexit subcommittee meeting tomorrow? Is that your understanding? So do you think we're going to getting any clearer or getting any closer to some clarity?
I'm assuming that they'll be talking about how to resolve the impasse on Ireland, but let's just remember the fallback position here. The UK government has been saying right from the start that on our side of the line, there is not going to be any obtrusive infrastructure. We're not going to put up border posts. We're not going to put up checks. We're not going to put up booths. So this whole argument is about what happens on the Irish side of the border. This whole argument is about how does Britain help the EU avoid a hard border on the Irish side of the line. Now, we are not the demandeurs here, as the diplomatic phrase goes. We're not the ones who are coming asking for a favour. And if at the end there is a failure to reach agreement, obviously there's still going to be no infrastructure on our side, and it will then be for Ireland to decide whether they want to be the people who put up customs posts on their side. And I frankly, in the real world, I can't see any situation where that's going to happen.
True. Daniel, listen, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll talk to you again soon.